January 17, 1943. Thorpe Abbotts, England. 04:30 hours. The pre-dawn frost clings to the hardstands like a second skin. In the darkness, two silhouettes rise against the Suffolk sky, metal giants waiting in the cold. One is angular, slab-sided, built like a boxcar with wings. The other carries curves, a greenhouse nose, a shape that seems to belong more to the air than the ground. B-24 Liberator, B-17 Flying Fortress. To the ground crews preparing them, they are just bombers. To the men who will fly them into the teeth of the Reich, they are something else entirely. Sanctuary, weapon, coffin, home. A lieutenant named James Harker, navigator, 381st Bomb Group, stands between them, leather jacket zipped tight against the wind. He has flown 21 missions in a B-17 called Devil's Daughter. Tomorrow, he will transfer to a new squadron, a B-24 outfit bound for North Africa. He does not yet know that this choice, this aircraft, will define not just his war, but his survival. He only knows the cold, the waiting, and the low rumble of engines beginning their warm-up cycle. The B-17's right cyclones cough, catch, settle into a deep, steady growl. The B-24's Pratt & Whitney's whine higher, sharper, a different voice entirely. By the end of the war, more than 12,000 B-17s and over 18,000 B-24s will fill the skies over Europe and the Pacific. The B-24 will drop more bombs, fly more missions, and outnumber the fortress in nearly every measurable category. Yet among the men who flew them, a fierce and unshakable preference will emerge, a loyalty not to logic or statistics, but to something deeper, to the feel of an airplane under fire, to the sound of its wings holding together at 25,000 feet, to the way it brought them home. This is not a story of which bomber was better. It is a story of why men believed one was.
The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress entered service in 1938, a product of pre-war American optimism and the belief that a heavily armed bomber could defend itself without fighter escort. Its name was aspirational, Fortress, a declaration that this machine would be a castle in the sky. 4 engines, 50 caliber machine guns in the later models, a wingspan of 103 feet, a maximum speed of 287 miles per hour. It could carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs on a short-range mission, though operational loads were often closer to 4,000 or 5,000 pounds to extend range and maintain altitude. The B-24 Liberator, designed by Consolidated Aircraft and introduced in 1940, was built for efficiency. It was faster, top speed 290 miles per hour. It could fly farther, maximum range over 2,000 miles compared to the B-17's 1,850. It could carry more bombs, up to 8,800 pounds in optimal configurations. Its Davis wing, a high aspect ratio marvel of aerodynamics, gave it greater lift and fuel efficiency. On paper, the B-24 was the superior machine. 8th Air Force planners knew this. So did the statisticians at Wright Field. So did the men in Washington who allocated production contracts. But the men who flew them knew something else. Bovington, England, March 1943. Second Lieutenant Robert Morgan, pilot, has just completed transition training from B-17s to B-24s. He will later become famous as the pilot of the Memphis Belle, but in March of 1943, he is simply another aviator learning a new aircraft. His logbook records the differences in clinical terms: higher cruise speed, greater fuel capacity, tricycle landing gear. What the logbook does not record is the feel. The B-17 sits low, its wings mounted low on the fuselage. When you stand in the cockpit, you can see them. You can see the engines. You can watch the propellers, the nacelles, the leading edges cutting through cloud. It is a psychological comfort, irrational perhaps, but real. You are in the airplane, surrounded by it, held by it.
The B-24's Davis wing sits high, above the fuselage. The cockpit is beneath it, buried in the nose. When you fly it, you cannot see the wings. You sit in a tunnel of aluminum and plexiglass, the engines somewhere above and behind you, their sound muffled, their presence abstract. The visibility forward is excellent. The visibility to the sides, where fighters come from, is not. The sensation is of being inside a tube, hurtling through space, disconnected from the machine that carries you. Morgan writes in a letter to his wife, "The B-24 is faster, and I suppose that's something." The statistics tell one story. The experiences of combat crews tell another. Between 1942 and 1945, the 8th Air Force in Europe will lose 4,754 B-17s and 3,626 B-24s to all causes: combat, accident, weather. But the 8th operated more B-17 groups than B-24 groups, and the missions were not identical. The 15th Air Force in Italy, by contrast, flew predominantly B-24s and suffered losses proportional to sortie rates. Loss rates per mission, per sortie, per bomb tonnage dropped all fall within a few percentage points of each other. Objectively, neither airplane was significantly safer. But perception is not objective, and in war, perception becomes reality. Over Schweinfurt, Germany, October 14, 1943. The second raid on Schweinfurt will become infamous. 291 bombers dispatched, 60 lost, 600 men dead or missing. Black Thursday. The mission that proved unescorted daylight bombing was unsustainable. Among the formations that day, both B-17s and B-24s fly, and both bleed. But the stories that return are different. A B-17 named Jersey Bounce, 91st Bomb Group, takes flak through the No. 3 engine. Fire erupts, spreads along the wing. The pilot, Captain Harold Stouse, cannot feather the prop. The fire grows. The wing begins to warp, the metal glowing cherry red at the root. The co-pilot calls to bail out. Stouse holds the yoke, keeps the airplane level, gives the crew time.
8 men jump. The wing holds long enough. Stouse and the engineer ride it down, somehow survive the crash. The wing held. A B-24 named Thundermug, 44th Bomb Group, takes a near-identical hit. Fire in the No. 3 engine. The pilot attempts to feather. The prop freezes. The fire spreads to the wing root. The Davis wing, so efficient, so slender, burns through faster. The structural box beam, thinner than the B-17's, fails. The wing folds upward, shears away. The bomber enters a flat spin. No one gets out. Both airplanes were doomed, but one gave its crew time, the other did not. The men who witnessed this, who flew beside Jersey Bounce and Thundermug, did not need engineering reports. They saw the wings, they knew. The B-17's wings were built using a multi-spar design, with fixed structural members running the full span. The wing was deep, heavy, robust. It could absorb punishment, flak, cannon fire, collision damage, and often remain flyable. The B-24's Davis wing, by contrast, was built around a single primary spar and a thin structural box. It was lighter, more efficient, and aerodynamically superior. It was also less tolerant of damage. Boeing engineers, when pressed, would later acknowledge this. The B-17 was over-engineered for its role, they said. It carried structural weight that was, in peacetime terms, unnecessary. But peacetime terms did not apply over Germany, over Ploesti, over Rabaul. The extra weight became extra margin. The margin became survival. Lieutenant Colonel James Stewart, yes, that James Stewart, flew B-24s with the 445th Bomb Group. He would later say, the B-24 was a pilot's airplane. You had to fly it every second. The B-17 was a cruise airplane. Rattleston, England, June 1944. Staff Sergeant Michael Rostov, ball turret gunner, has flown 30 missions, 15 in B-17s, 15 in B-24s. He is one of the few men in the 8th Air Force with direct comparative experience.
When reporters visit his base, they ask him which he prefers. He does not hesitate. Why? Because when you're hanging in a ball turret under a B-17, you can see the wings, you can see the bomb bay doors, you can see the ground through the plexiglass, sure, but you can also see the airplane around you. In the 24, you're hanging under a high wing. You can't see anything but sky and earth. When the flak comes up, You don't know if you're hit until you feel it. In the fort, you see the holes appear. You see the fire. You know. This is the recurring symbol of the B-17 in the minds of the men who flew it. You can see the wings. It is a small thing, perhaps trivial to an engineer, but to a man at 25,000 feet, surrounded by fighters, watching black puffs of flak erupt in his path, the ability to see the structure that holds him aloft is not trivial. It is everything. The B-24 had advantages, and the men who flew it knew them. It was faster in level flight, which meant less time in the target area. Its long range made it invaluable in the Pacific, where distances swallowed shorter-legged aircraft. Its tricycle landing gear made it easier to land, especially for new pilots. The B-17's tailwheel configuration required skill, finesse, and a willingness to accept the occasional ground loop. But advantages on paper dissolved in the crucible of combat. The B-24's speed advantage, 3 miles per hour at cruise, was meaningless in formation flying, where the group moved at the speed of the slowest airplane. Its range advantage mattered in the Pacific, but in Europe, where targets were closer and fighter escort increasingly available, range became secondary to survivability. And the landing gear, while easier, was also more fragile. The nose wheel, mounted far forward, absorbed tremendous stress on rough or damaged runways.
B-24s that returned on 2 engines or with structural damage sometimes collapsed on landing, the nose wheel punching up through the flight deck. B-17s, with their tailwheel stance, settled gently, even when crippled. There is a photograph, famous among aviation historians, taken at Kimballton in late 1944. A B-17 named All-American, 97th Bomb Group, sits on the hardstand. Its tail has been nearly severed by a collision with a German fighter. The entire rear fuselage hangs by a few structural members, the tail surfaces drooping like a broken bird. The airplane flew home. It landed. The crew walked away. No equivalent photograph exists of a B-24. Wendover Field, Utah, November 1944. The 509th Composite Group is forming. Its mission is secret, unprecedented. It will deliver a weapon not yet tested, against targets not yet selected, from a base not yet built. The group will need bombers, modified, stripped down, capable of carrying a single massive payload. The initial aircraft selected is the B-17, but within weeks, planners switched to the B-24, then finally to a modified B-29. The reasoning is never fully documented, but later reports suggest the B-17's bomb bay was too narrow for the weapons casing. The B-24's bay was larger, deeper, more flexible. And yet, when the mission finally flies, when Enola Gay lifts off from Tinian on August 6, 1945, the airplane is a B-29, not a B-17, not a B-24. The choice was made on capability, not preference. But the men who flew the training missions in B-17s never stopped believing it should have been the Fortress. Over the North Sea, February 1945. Captain Harold Fisher, pilot, 390th Bomb Group, is flying his 43rd mission. His B-17, times a-wasting, has been hit by flak over Bremen. The number 2 engine is dead, feathered. The number 4 is running rough, losing oil pressure. The formation has left them behind. They are alone, at 12,000 feet, over the water, with 180 miles to go. The co-pilot suggests they ditch. Fisher refuses. The engineer suggests they bail out over land. Fisher refuses. He holds the yoke, trims the airplane, nurses the throttles. The B-17 descends, slowly, steadily, but it flies. The 2 good engines pull them home. They cross the English coast at 4,000 feet. They land at the first available field, a fighter base in Norfolk. The runway is short, the brakes are marginal. Fisher stands on the pedals, feels the tire skid, the tail come up. They stop with 50 feet to spare. The base commander, an RAF officer, walks out to meet them. He looks at the B-17,
Bullet holes in the wings, the dead engine, the crumpled cowling on the number 4. He looks at Fisher. Fisher does not understand. Solid, the RAF officer says, immovable. This was the heart of the preference, not speed, not range, not payload, safety, or rather, the feeling of safety. The B-17 felt solid. Its controls were heavy, requiring muscle, but they were predictable. Its engines were slower revving, less temperamental. Its structure was visible, tangible, present. When it was damaged, it groaned, shuddered, but it held. The men who flew it learned to trust it, not because of statistics, but because it kept its promises. The B-24, by contrast, felt fragile. Its controls were lighter, more responsive, but also more twitchy. Its high-mounted wing made it prone to Dutch roll, a side-to-side oscillation that unnerved new pilots. Its engines ran hotter, failed faster. Its structure, though aerodynamically superior, was less forgiving. When it was hit, it came apart cleanly, quickly, without warning. A B-17 gave you time to think. A B-24 gave you time to die. By the numbers, 12,731 B-17s were built, 18,482 B-24s. The Liberator dropped more bombs, flew more missions, and remained in service longer. It was, by every objective measure, more successful. But success and preference are not the same. In 1945, as the war ended, the Army Air Forces began retiring its bomber fleet.
The B-24s went first. By 1946, they were nearly all gone, scrapped, melted down, erased. The B-17s lingered. Some were converted to transports. Some became search and rescue aircraft. Some were sold to civilian operators and flew for decades. The last operational B-17 in military service was retired in 1959. The last operational B-24 was retired in 1947. The men chose, the Air Force chose, history chose. There is a museum now in Duxford, England, where both airplanes sit side by side. The B-17, Sally B, still flies. The B-24, Witchcraft, is a static display, restored but grounded. Visitors walk through both. They touch the aluminum skin, peer into the cockpits, imagine the men who flew them. Invariably, they ask the guides, which was better? The guides, many of them veterans or historians, give the same answer. It depends on what you needed. But then they add, quietly, almost as an afterthought, the crews preferred the B-17. March 1946, Patterson Field, Ohio. James Harker, the navigator who stood between two bombers on a frozen English morning in 1943, has returned home. He flew 36 missions, 21 in B-17s, 15 in B-24s. He survived both. He is, by any measure, lucky. A journalist interviews him for a local paper. The article is never published, but the transcript survives. The journalist asks, which airplane was better? Harker pauses. He lights a cigarette. He looks out the window at the rows of parked bombers, waiting to be scrapped. The B-24 could fly higher, faster, and farther, he says. It could carry more bombs. The journalist waits. But the B-17 brought me home, Harker says. Every time. Even when it shouldn't have. Even when I thought we were done. He does not elaborate. He does not need to. This is the truth that statistics cannot capture. The B-17 was not objectively superior. It was not faster, not more efficient, not more capable. But it was forgiving. It was present.
It was a machine that communicated with its crew, that signaled its distress, that fought to stay airborne even when mortally wounded. The B-24 was a tool. The B-17 was a partner. And in war, when survival is measured in seconds and margins are measured in inches, partnership matters more than performance. The final missions of the European War were flown in April 1945. The targets were crumbling. The Luftwaffe was shattered. The flak was sporadic.
The bombers flew in clear skies, unopposed, dropping their loads on rail yards and airfields that no longer mattered. On April 25, 1945, a formation of B-17s from the 381st Bomb Group, James Harker's old unit, flew the last 8th Air Force heavy bomber mission of the war. The target was a rail junction near Salzburg. The flak was light. No aircraft were lost. The mission report, filed at Thorpe Abbotts that evening, is dry and bureaucratic. Tonnage dropped, target coverage, weather conditions. It does not mention the silence in the briefing room afterward, or the way the pilots touched the wings of their airplanes before climbing down, or the fact that several crew chiefs were seen standing beside their B-17s in the dark, smoking, saying nothing. The B-24 groups flew their last missions the same week. Their reports are identical in tone, but the ceremonies afterward were different. The B-17 groups held memorial services, speeches, toasts. The B-24 groups held debriefings and moved on. In the decades that followed, the legend of the Flying Fortress grew. Films were made, books were written. Air shows featured B-17s, lovingly restored, their engines thundering over crowds that had never known war. The B-24, by contrast, faded. Fewer were preserved. Fewer flew. Fewer people remembered. This was not an accident. This was memory choosing its symbols. The B-17 became the symbol of American air power, not because it was the best bomber, but because it embodied something the B-24 did not: endurance, loyalty.
The refusal to quit. These were the qualities that won the war. Not speed, not efficiency, not payload. There is a recording, made in 1987, of a reunion of the 91st Bomb Group. The men are old now, grandfathers, veterans of a war 50 years past. They gather in a hotel ballroom in Ohio, and they tell stories. One man, a pilot, talks about ditching in the channel after a mission to Berlin. The B-17 floated for 6 minutes, long enough for the crew to board life rafts, long enough for rescue boats to reach them. All 10 men survived. Another man, a bombardier, talks about a mission where the nose was shattered by a 20mm shell. The plexiglass was gone. The wind was a solid force. The temperature was 60 below. He hung on, dropped the bombs, and passed out from hypoxia. The B-17 flew itself home. A third man, a waist gunner, says nothing. He simply raises his glass. The others understand. At the end of the evening, someone asks, "Did any of you ever fly in a B-24? 3 hands go up. And? One of them, a navigator, smiles. "It was fine," he says. The room nods. No one argues, no one needs to. The epilogue is this: war is not won by the best machines. It is won by the machines that men trust. The B-24 Liberator was, in many ways, the superior bomber. It carried more, flew farther, cost less. But the men who flew into the flak and the fighters in the freezing skies over Europe did not choose it. They chose the B-17. They chose it because it forgave their mistakes, because it absorbed their fear, because when everything went wrong, and in war everything always goes wrong, it held together. The B-17 was not a perfect machine. It was something better. It was a machine that understood the men who flew it were not perfect either. And in that shared imperfection, in that partnership of metal and flesh and will, the war was won. The wings held, the engines pulled, the fortress flew, and the men came home.